we are going to jump right into the APR. So before we get into the system, just briefly looking at the HUD exchange and what HUD says about the APR. So the big things that we want to point out here are just in that first paragraph that recipients of HUD funding through CoC homeless assistance grants, and you can see all these different examples there, and of course that's not fully inclusive. Those programs who receive that CoC assistance grants are required to submit the annual performance report, or APR, electronically every year. We do that through Sage, and this is just a screenshot of the HUD exchange, and you can see that there's a button here to log into Sage. We will go into Sage and show you how to do that today. So let's take a look. Let's jump right in with the APR. I am logged into the training site, and I'm going to click this workspace button up here and next to the ClientTrack logo to navigate over to my reports workspace. So you may have several different workspaces here in your account, and it will depend on your access, but everyone will have access to this reports workspace no matter what type of access you have. And what I'm going to do is go, if your menu is not open on the left-hand side, you'll want to make sure that you open it and pin it so that you can see all of these different reports. Under HMIS exports on the left-hand side, you can see we have several different options. We're just going to focus right here this morning on the CSV APR for fiscal year 2020 and then the CAPER in just a few moments.
Really briefly before we move on with this course, I do want to note that as of October 1st, 2021, the HMIS data standards and reporting standards have been updated to the format fiscal year 2022. So if you're taking this course or watching this video anytime after October 1st, 2021, then you are looking for the fiscal year 2022 reports. If you pull the 2020 report specs, then that report will not process properly in Sage. So again, you are looking for the fiscal year 2022 reports that will look like this on your screen. So what you see in the rest of the video is fiscal year 2020, but you should be looking for fiscal year 2022. Let's jump back into the video.
So when I click on the APR, well, I'll just stop to say all of these reports here are canned reports, right? So every report that's on this menu on the left-hand side is already built into the system. We don't really customize it. We just tell it what we want to see, and it gives us that data. So these pages are all going to look really similar. At the very top of the page, you can save your report settings. So if you run this report regularly, you know, maybe for always the last 2 weeks or whatever, you can save those settings so that you don't have to go through all of these steps every single time. And you can save multiple settings as well. So you can see here that I have a report test setting saved from last training. And when I click on that, then it's going to pre-populate some of my selections from the last time I ran this report. Now, I don't have a whole bunch of settings put in because there's not a whole lot of data in the training site. So if I filter too much, then we won't see anything. But I am going to just run a report from scratch too, so we can see that. Next, we have to enter a date range. So the system has several different options for a date range that we can select that'll pre-populate for us, or we can choose a customized date range on our own. So if you wanted to see a specific day, week, month, however you wanted to look at that, you could put in some dates. I'm just going to choose previous fiscal year so that, because I know there's information in the training system for that date range. Under organization, you will need to select, make sure that your organization is selected here. So right now I'm just using MDHA training. Of course, if you were with the Bridge or City Square or whatever, then you would make sure that that option was selected. Next, you have the option to filter the APR by grant. I would not recommend using this unless you have you know, specific grants and funders that you need to report. on and you want to filter that way, but just for your general APR, you shouldn't really have to filter by grant. What we're going to do instead is filter by program and just select one program for this APR. It is important to know that for submitting the APR to SAGE, you should only run one APR per program. So if your agency has multiple programs, that all need to submit an APR, you should still run this report one program at a time. Of course, if you're reporting internally, just trying to pull some numbers organization-wide or something like that, then you can run this for multiple programs. But in terms of submitting the report to HUD, you're going to want to just choose one program. So I'm going to scroll down here and choose our HMIS. There we go. It's already selected from my report settings. HMIS Training Emergency Shelter Program. And if you wanted to use this internally and you wanted to select multiple programs, it's just as easy as checking them, and then you can see the check marks on the left-hand side next to all the ones that you've selected. If you wanted to select all of the programs, then this button here is a select all. So pretty similar to some other like multiple option checklists in the system. And then at the very bottom, we have this option to generate a validation file. So the validation file is going to be client level data. If we uncheck this box, then we're only going to have kind of an aggregate like overview of the data without any client level information. When we check this box to generate a validation file, that's what's going to give us all the way down into that client level so we can see for each client some of the details on the report. That being said, because we are going to generate a validation file with client level data, then the system is going to kind of hold us accountable for keeping that data safe. So once I click Run Report, you'll see that the system wants me to encrypt this report. Now you can choose to encrypt it with a password. It creates this file that sometimes firewalls and things don't really like. So if you want to do the encryption option, you can, or we can uncheck this encrypt export box, and then ClientTrack basically gives you a message that says ClientTrack is no longer responsible for keeping this data safe after you export this report. And you're going to be required to check this box here that says, I assume the full responsibility of ensuring, that my file is safe and secure. So I am going to leave the encryption unchecked, and then I'm going to assume responsibility for this report before I export it. Now I'll click Done. And I get a notification that says your export has been queued and will be processed at the next available time. So that's great. At the end of that report being run, I'm automatically taken to this page called Files on Server. So I can get to this page on my own right here in the top left corner of the menu. So further down this page, you can see all the reports that I've run in the past. They happen to coincide with dates that we had this training. What do you know? These are reports that the system has finished creating these reports. They're ready for me to export here using this button, or I can delete the file from the server if I'd like. Now, what you don't see is the report that I just ran today on the 26th. So we have this link here kind of on the top left corner of this page that says click to view the status of export or import tasks. So this is where my report will be kind of hanging out until it's ready for me to view. So I'm going to click to view. And now I can see that this report that I ran just now is in a preload file. So this is the system saying, we're going to run this report as soon as we can. And the preload file will just give me a little bit of information about the report that I asked the system to run. The one thing that is really helpful about this page is the task ID. So once the report is generated, the system is going to generate a task ID for that report. Something to note, it's really helpful, especially if you're putting in a ticket to Phil, to the HMIS team, but most of them, they go to Phil for reporting. If you're putting in a ticket about a report that you ran, you're having issues with it or something happened, you're not seeing what you expected to see, Having this task ID is really helpful because then we can see that exact report in the system. And you can know that you're referencing the same report that you ran every time. You can see they all have really similar names, right? So I ran 3 data quality reports and they all look exactly the same, but I can know which one was which by the task ID. So that can be really, really helpful for you, especially if you're running these reports often. This page refreshes every so often. So you can see that it's counting down. And once the report has run, it will stay on this page as well that it ran successfully. But also we'll see reports that have not run yet, including this preload report. And then once the preload is done, we'll see that the reports are starting to be generated. What I'm going to do is take a look at an older report, since this will probably take about 10 or 15 minutes to get our report totally ready for us. So I'm going to go back and take a look at an APR that I've run in the past for the same time frame, previous fiscal year, same program, just ran it last month instead. So here is, let's see, I'm actually going to go into the client's, into the file and take a look at the task IDs. So here is my APR 28234. So this is where it's really helpful because the APR and the CAPER, as you can see here, they're almost identical. Like all this just kind of blurs together for me. So I'm looking for 28234, and that's going to be my APR export. And the task ID is right here at the end of the file name. So I'm going to download that APR export. And once it's ready, we'll open it up and take a look. It will download as a zip file because there are, I clicked too soon. Wasn't quite ready for me yet. I might have to do it again. I was impatient. There we go. I'll let it load all the way before I click this time. It is going to download as a zip file because there are several Excel files that are generated from just this one report. So we'll see that in just a moment. Here we go. So this APR export generates several different Q files all the way down to 27I, several different ones. I just want to open up one here, but then we're going to actually put this export into Sage so that we can see all this data at once, kind of in an easier to digest format. But just to give you an idea of what's in these files, each file is going to be for a different question. And here we can see this one is just the organization name and kind of how I ran the report, right? So the org I was under, the project name, the ID of the project in the system, reporting information. Let's take a look at maybe Q6. So this one is going to have information about destination and income sources at start, annual and exit, and you can see I have no errors there because there's probably no data in the training site. And you can see that this is just general information, right? So there would be no client data on this file, just like we're expecting to see. But let's actually import this to Sage so that we can take a look at all of these at once without having to open every single file. I'm going to go to sage hmis.info in my internet browser. And that link that I showed you earlier from the, let's see if we can get that. This link here on the HUD Exchange will take you to the exact same page as the one that I just typed in. So that's an easy to find link on HUD if you need to. We have the option to log in or create an account, but I'm actually just going to run a test report. So you can come and run this test anytime without having to log in or anything like that. Sage will ask us to select the type of report that we're going to run, so either the APR or the CAPER. And it's important that this selection is correct because if you say I accidentally clicked CAPER, but I tried to upload an APR, it's going to say, that's wrong. You need to go back and try this again. There's a little bit of information here about how to submit the report. You can read all of this if you would like to. It's pretty simple. You just choose the file from your computer. And I'm going to have to go to my downloads and find this APR export here. We'll open that and confirm that we are in fact people and do upload and test. So this first screen is just going to say, yes, you actually uploaded an APR. Here's kind of a preview, and then you still need to scroll down and click Create Report to see the details. So if you're just wanting to test the export before you actually submit it, you don't need to go to Create Report. You can just test the upload. Yes, it works. Okay, then go back and actually log in and submit it. If you're wanting to get this information kind of aggregate all this data for your own purposes, then you can actually create the report and see what it looks like. So now he says the report is ready for printing, and let's take a look. So here is our APR export. You can see that Q4 file that I opened that had project information is here. And then all the way down the page, this page is, let me try to grab this scroll bar. Page is very long, has a lot of information. I would recommend going to, after this training, uploading an APR for yourself and just taking a look at the information that's on here. We're not going to look at every single detail today. Like I said, there was 30 plus files. But we can take a look at just kind of a few types of different information that we'll see in this report. So this first Q5, it looks like we have information about the number of people served in different categories. So adults, children, an unknown age, leavers, stayers. We have some information about number of people who are chronically homeless and a few other categories there. So again, as you can see, this is just an aggregate overview number. There's no client level information here. It's just counts, basically. Further down, we get some information about data quality. So, you know, some universal data elements in these first few. That income information, so here's that Q6 that we opened, and we saw 0% error rate on that file, and that's showing here in Sage as well. Some information about chronicity, total number of records with chronically homeless clients, and some more information about that experience for them. And again, just kind of an overview. There's information here about timeliness, number of persons served. It goes on for a while, right? Number of persons engaged, gender. So this report, one thing that is really helpful about this report, you can see that has a lot of information. In just a second, when we look at the client level data, this report can offer you a lot of resources when you're just looking for internal reporting. So we get a lot of reporting requests saying, I want to see this information about clients, or I want to know how many clients have this experience or this data reported. The APR is kind of your go-to resource for, let's see if that information is in the APR, because again, it has so much information in it. You may be able to pull that information from the APR and the client level data. So let's actually take a look at that now. So I can see here is the one that I just downloaded. This was my APR export. I also ran an APR validation file the last time I ran this report. So again, validation is client level data. So let's download that one and take a look at how they're different. It's still going to be a zip file. Again, there's a bunch of information in there. This time, not quite so many files, and we can see here's the, we're going to open the detail file first and then just one or two of these other files to take a look. It looks like we just have one client to look at, but what I want to show you is how much info is in this detail file. So imagine if you have, 100 clients for this reporting period, you'd have that information there for all the clients. It starts out with client ID, relationship to head of household, some enrollment information, and then we get into demographic information. So name, name quality, social security number, age, race, ethnicity, gender. I'm going to scroll to the right here. We have prior living situation and location. And if you think back to your entry assessment, right, this is all information that's on those first couple pages of the intake. So when I'm looking through this file mentally, I just kind of go through, this is all that information that I got at entry from my client. Is the client chronically homeless? Yes or no? And how long was their last stay in their last living situation? So it looks like some of this information maybe wasn't recorded. Number of times homeless, number of months homeless. So again, some more information about chronicity there. Here's their project start date or enroll date. And now, as we keep scrolling, we're going to get more information about, we're going to see at start and at exit and annual, and those different columns, it's going to be similar information as we keep going through the report, but at those different kind of snapshots where we've assessed that client, right? So at start, obviously, is going to be that entry assessment. At exit, obviously, your exit assessment, and then annual for that annual assessment that might have been recorded. So now we're getting into project type, project name, program name, excuse me. There's a housing move-in date recorded for this client. So if you need to report on that, that's an easy way to get that in the system. Address, sexual orientation. Let's scroll over. Here we go. Here's some income information, income at entry. And now you can see all these, like I said, are entry. So we have earned income, unemployment income, SSI income, right? All these are at entry, As we keep going, now we have the same data, but at exit. All income and benefit information. Now we have the same income, but annual, right? So just like I was saying a second ago, several pieces of information here, especially regarding income in terms of each individual assessment that you've done for that client. Now at the end, we get some really helpful information about leavers and stayers and length of stay. So you can see here at the end that this client's length of stay in the ESG program and in the CoC, whether or not they were a leaver or a stayer, so were they exited in this reporting period? If yes, then they would be a leaver. If not, then they would be a stayer. And then if they had bed nights, you would see those bed nights there as well. So this detail file, especially for income, is going to be really helpful in terms of getting that client level information, and then you can, manipulate this data and report on it more if needed. Let's take a look at just one other file from this validation file that we downloaded. See if we can find one with any information in it at all. Here we go. So same client, ID 7. But it looks like this file has to specifically do, let's see, has leaver and stayer information, what stage that data was collected. Okay, so this looks like barrier information, physical disability, developmental disability, mental health, etc. So again, client level data on barriers. And what I would suggest is that you just explore some of these files in your own time. These DQ are data quality files. So if we had any errors in data quality, then they would show here which data element, the client's name and ID, and then some of those details would show for those data elements. Again, there's not a ton of data in the training site, so some of that's not going to display on these reports. So what would be more helpful is run this report when you have a few minutes, take a look at some of these different files and see what type of information is there, because again, we refer a lot of users to this report when they have reporting questions because it just has so much information. And it's normally going to be able to meet those reporting needs that you have, whatever they are. And of course, if it can't, then we'll help you find another report that can, or we can help you create a custom report that can, which we'll go over later. Before we move on to the CAPER, I do want to quickly go back to this click to view now and see, yes, so the preload file is done. And I just want to show you what you would normally see if you were waiting on this report. So now that it's been about 10 or 15 minutes, we can see that my APR export is running. It hasn't started yet, but the system realizes that it's like in the queue, right? It's waiting to create this report and then the validation file as well. Of course, if you did not click that box for validation, then you would only see this export, which is just that overview data. And there's the validation file with the client level data. So this is where you can check on the status of those reports that you have run. And then once they have run, then they'll show up here, which we'll probably see them in a bit before we log off the call. The CAPER is specifically for programs that are receiving ESG funding or emergency solutions grants. Those ESG programs are required to submit a CAPER, and CAPER stands for Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. So very similar information to the APRs, just specifically for those ESG programs. And again, you can go to the HUD Exchange and just search ESG CAPER, and you can get all this information on your own. I would recommend, if you are responsible for submitting those, that you do go read the submission guidance for HUD. We're not going to go into those details now. And again, that page will also give you the link to log into Sage if you forget to write it down or lose your notes or whatever from this training. It's right here underneath the APR. Again, just as a review, I am on my reports workspace and under HMIS exports. So that is where you'll find the CAPER. And when we click, this page is almost indistinguishable from the APR page. So we have the option to load a saved report if we have saved one. I don't think I went over it on this last one, but I will show you actually how to go through the steps to save this report in just a moment. We have this, again, the same date range information. So we're also going to run this for previous fiscal year. Organization, again, is you just want to make sure that the organization that you work for is checked in this box. I'm not going to filter by grant, again, because I'm not doing any specific, reporting to any specific funders. I just want to see for the whole program. But if you did need to filter by a specific grant that you were receiving, you certainly could if that information is in the system. And again, I'm going to choose the box for filter by program, which is required. And if you needed to select all your programs, you could. The same information applies to the CAPER that applied to the APR in terms of submitting to Sage. You will just want to select one program. So I'm going to scroll down and find that HMIS training. Oh, I went past it. Emergency shelter again. And then again, we have the option to generate a validation file, so getting that client level data. Let's see. We're going to run this report, and again, I'm just going to accept full responsibility for the data that's inside instead of encrypting it. If you do encrypt it, I just suggest that you record this password somewhere, that you have it for later, so that when you need to open that file again, you can. I'm going to make sure that box is checked, and then click Done. And I get the same notification, your report will be processed, and I get bumped to the clients on files on server page again. Now we can see that our APR has run. So now we have this one that you can see the date there that I ran for today. So, but it took about 20 or 30 minutes to run, which is not too bad. I am going to scroll down and find the CAPER that I ran last time, so we don't have to wait another 20 minutes to see that report. But I'm going to have to look for the task ID again just to make sure I have the right one. So I'm looking for my CAPER export, which is 237. And then wondering if I did, here we are. This is going to be the validation report for it in 238. And you can see that the APR and CAPER validation files have very similar names. So again, it's really helpful to be able to go and grab that task ID. And here you can see I ran an APR, and then I had the validation file for that APR, then the CAPER, and the validation file for that CAPER. So if you're running a bunch of these back to back, actually the names are pretty much identical. You can kind of use that as a guide to see like the time that you ran the APR, and then the validation file that has the exact same run information will be the validation file for that APR versus for this CAPER that I ran before. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm just looking at the task IDs on the end. Here's 237. So let's take a look at that CAPER. And again, we'll just look at it briefly and we'll upload it to Sage to see the details. And then we'll take a look at that validation file as well, which is pretty much identical to the APR. I will say once you download these, if you're running these regularly for any sort of internal reporting purposes, right, because you only have to submit them to Sage once a year, I would maybe download the file and then rename it so that they don't all have the exact same name there. Of course, the task ID is going to be in that. See if we can see that. So the task ID is going to be in that file name, which is helpful to have. But, to your point, after about 30 days, you're not going to be able to come here and easily see the task ID anymore. So if you want to rename it, keep the task ID in the name, but maybe something that's a little easier for your brain to process. That's what I would do if I was running them regularly, because this all kind of blurs together for me after a while. This CAPER export is going to look, like I've said multiple times, pretty much identical to the APR. We'll have not quite as many files here, but the same sort of individual files that have all of that aggregate data. So instead of opening those up, I'm just going to go back to Sage and try to upload this. We'll see if we're successful. I'm going to just run a test. This time we'll choose CAPER, and I'll grab that file from my computer. Not a robot. Don't think anyway. And then we'll do, so it looks like this was, sorry, I kind of scrolled past this. This upload was successful. So now we can create the actual report to print and look at the full thing. Right, let's view that report. And here we go. So a little bit of deja vu here, right, with the APR. The CAPER has, again, that project information, information on number of clients served in different areas, some data quality files, and then on and on it goes. So another really helpful report for, getting some of that aggregate data. And the main difference here is that the CAPER, because they are required for ESG programs, the CAPER is only going to show clients who have a current living situation recorded. Current living situation and date of engagement. So those two data elements are required for ESG programs for that client to be considered on your data quality reports and also in this CAPER. So when you run the CAPER versus the APR, and you see those differences of why isn't this client showing up on the CAPER? They're enrolled. I was expecting to see them there. Why isn't that information there? That is because that client doesn't have a date of engagement or a current living situation recorded. So that is something to keep in mind. We do get that question a little bit about, why aren't these numbers what I was expecting to see, or why aren't these clients showing up on this report? And that's not the case for the APR, but it is the case for the CAPER. Let's just pick a round number. You know that you have 100 clients enrolled in your program that you've run this CAPER for. But then when you get to this report, you see, total number of persons served, and maybe it says 87 or whatever. And you're wondering, well, I have 100 clients enrolled. Why are they not all showing on this report? And the reason for that would be that they don't have one of those required data elements recorded. So that would be either date of engagement or a current living situation. So just as a brief overview, remember date of engagement is a data element that's recorded one time, and that's recorded at the time. This is again just for street outreach, emergency shelters, those ESG programs. And I know not everyone on the call is one of those programs necessarily, but as a brief overview for them, that date of engagement is recorded one time. At the point where you have your client has expressed interest basically in having either some sort of case management plan, sitting down and doing an assessment with you, an entry assessment. So for those programs, we know that we can enter, more basic data. Maybe we don't have all of the information on the client that we've met on the street or that just walked into my program today. Maybe we don't have a rapport with them to where they're willing to sit down and have that conversation with us about, getting their data into the system, having some sort of plan, right, for pursuing housing or pursuing other services. Once you sit down and have that conversation with the client, that's when you record the date of engagement. So they could have a project start of January 5th, but you didn't actually engage them until today. And then that date of engagement would be recorded for today. So from today moving forward is when they would show up on that report. Current living situation is a little different. That one for street outreach programs should be recorded every time that you have contact with that client. At project start, anytime you have a conversation with them about their well-being, meeting any of their needs, any sort of housing plan, referring them to services, all of that, you would also record a current living situation. And at project exit, if you do have contact with that client at exit, then a current living situation is required as well. For emergency shelters, that's a little different. For anything that is just basic sheltering needs, things like, bed management, personal care items, you don't have to record a current living situation when you're just contacting that client for those basic services. But anytime that your contact with that client extends beyond those basic care needs, then that's when you would also record a current living situation. So for those ESG programs, if you haven't been recording current living situation or date of engagement for your clients, then they're not going to show up here. Which I think I feel like I hear some frustration from people about that of, well, I want them to show up on this report. But it's good for you too, because if you haven't engaged that client, you don't have enough of their data to be responsible for data quality, and you're not held responsible for their data quality if they don't have a date of engagement. So, it's like two sides of the same coin, right? Is you don't get to necessarily see them on the CAPER, but on the other hand, you're not responsible for the quality of their data on your data quality report. See this validation report. I thought I had downloaded it, but I guess I did not. So let's download it now. There we go. So here's our validation file for the CAPER, and again, it's identical. So the only different, the type of information is identical. The only difference is that those clients who don't have those data elements recorded are not going to be in it. But same type of information about income, leavers and stayers, all of that's going to be available in that client level report as well, the validation file. On the files on server from our reports workspace, when we click to view and we have these we have the status here for the report that we've run. I can't make this bigger. And you can see here run successfully, right? But if your report has any sort of error, on the left-hand side here with this little action arrow next to the name of the report, if I open that and do view log, then I can see, all the details about how the system ran this report. And you may, if you receive some sort of error on a report, then viewing that log will help you to see exactly what that error is, and then that can help us troubleshoot a little easier. So if you're running a canned report and you receive some sort of error, going to this log here will be able to help us better help you in figuring out why that error happened and then getting your report to you. So again, that's from the files on server. When we do click to view to see the task list, whichever report is having the issue, that action arrow on the left-hand side to view the log. And it's kind of like hidden behind a few different, clicks. So I just wanted to point that out before we move on.